That's Ms. Farah Alyaqout, who works at Kuwait Technical College, and she is part of KTech's Institute for Private Training, and she works as a training and development analyst at Kuwait Technical College. And prior to that, Ms. Farah has taught the Foundation English program, where she taught numerous courses doing critical thinking, career development, and so much more. And part of her studies was incorporating gamification within her teaching, and I think that's what we're going to be talking about today. Previous to her Kuwait Technical College experience, Ms. Farah Alyaqout was an assistant instructor at Kuwait University's College of Arts. So Ms. Farah Alyaqout graduated with a double major in anthropology and English, and is currently working towards attaining her master's degree in comparative literature and cultural studies. So Ms. Farah, welcome aboard. Thank you for joining us today at TESOL Kuwait. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Reem, for this wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here and I feel very welcomed by you. So thank you very much. I think I'm going to share my screen right now, just so I can have everything ready.
Go ahead.
Great. So make sure. Excellent. My topic today, what I'm going to talk about today, is the gamification of adult education. There's a little bit of an alliteration there. It's hard to pronounce, but it's fun to say. I'm going to be comparing virtual games, as you can see, virtual games, physical games, and what I call physio-virtual games. Comparing and contrasting what I think works, how I've implemented those ideas and those games into my everyday curriculum. And, my everyday curriculum, both as an instructor and currently as a trainer. I use my own judgment and my students' feedback, student and trainees' feedback, in kind of judging what works in adult and higher education. I do want to stress that this is entirely my own perspective and from my own somewhat limited experience in teaching. This is something that I'm also going to get back to at the end, which is that this works for me, my personality. I did games and physical activities that I was comfortable with, that I remembered from my own childhood, that I remembered enjoying from when I was in elementary, middle, and high school. And I do want to stress that at the end of the day, it really does come down to personal preference and what works for you, the games that you feel comfortable playing, the kind of activities that you feel comfortable participating in, because that genuineness, that kind of honesty and let's say verisimilitude in games and in education is just what makes it so much more fun and genuine for yourself and for the trainers and students that you're working with. I think if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't made sure the games I was playing and using were things that I liked, I would have gotten different feedback from my students, because people can tell when something is real and genuine. I want to start with a little bit of a preamble. I want to say, and this is my introduction, I want to start with my introduction. We're still on this page, apologies. There has been a lot of interest in Kuwait Technical College, the place that I currently work at, especially in their foundation department, which I was very recently an instructor in and a part of, on competency-based education and testing. We really try to emphasize in the foundation department abandoning traditional testing and quizzes and making sure that, or let's say, traditional testing and quizzes, and making sure that we didn't test students in the way that meant sitting in a room with a clock ticking and you had 2 hours to memorize the textbook and completely kind of regurgitate it on a page. And here I do want to give credit to the head of department, or the former head of department, Miss Carla Burton of the foundation department, who really encouraged that kind of education and testing and let us grow into our own and discover what worked for us. That kind of emphasis on independent study, where we have 2 hours of independent education at the foundation department, that kind of emphasis on creative endeavors, on think of testing in a way that isn't a test, that kind of way of thinking is something that really led to the birth of this paper, let's say, or this presentation, I apologize. So my introduction is that I relied, part of what made me start using games in my classes is that we started relying less on traditional textbooks in favor of competency-based training education. So we would have textbooks. We always, we never abandoned textbooks entirely, but we relied on them less. We made sure, because no textbook is ever going to kind of address on-the-spot questions, on-the-spot inquiries. If a student shows you a tweet and says, I didn't get that, no textbook's going to help you understand that or explain that to your student. So we started relying less on traditional textbooks and more on proving competency in other ways. I want you to tweet, and that's something that you're going to be graded on. I want you to write an email right in front of me right now, and that's what you're going to be graded on. So we really favored on-the-spot competency-based education rather than traditional methods of education. And that also allowed us to use games as a method of education. I developed activities and games which directly relate and address the learning difficulties and challenges faced by my class and even by very specific students. Addressing learning difficulties and learning differences in this modern age is something that is a lot more important and stressed upon than it was in previous, I think, decades, maybe even previous years, because this, I think it's relatively recent that people are focusing on people's different methods, students and other people's different methods of education and learning. We have students who have ADHD, we have students who have anxiety disorders, we have students who have, let's say, problems with IBS or anything like that. That means they can't sit in a room for 2 hours and have that be the way they're tested and have their entire grade be on those 2 hours that they spend in a room. So we started making sure that our grades weren't focused. There wasn't that chunk of like 25% is on that one assignment. There wasn't that chunk of like 30% of your final exam, your final exam, 30%. It's all about how you do in that final exam. We really stretched everything out to give students a chance and to make sure that we see their talents as well, because you do want to cater to people's different learning methods and learning abilities. Finally, I listened to the concerns of other foundation instructors and addressed their issues in language-based games. I think this is true of not just KTEC's foundation department, but other foundation departments in Kuwait and perhaps across the globe. The foundation department isn't just English, it's usually English and math. And in our foundation department, it's English, math, and computing. Those are the core classes that make up our foundation department. So what I did is that I made sure that I kind of had my ear to the ground. When I'd hear the computing instructor talk about how the students wouldn't, convert their laptops into English, she was teaching in English and they wouldn't convert their laptops language into English, I'd encourage them to do that in my class and say, that's a really good way of making sure that you're incorporating English into your everyday language, everyday use. When I would say 7,000 to a student and the student wouldn't know what 1,000 meant, how many zeros that meant, I would make sure, that's kind of something that affects the math department, the math instructor. So I would make sure to incorporate more math-based games into my English class. As an English instructor, I see the students 10 hours a week. The most the math and computing instructors see them is 4 hours a week. So I see them more than double than the other instructors do. So that's a real chance for me to introduce anything that I feel like I could do to bolster my fellow instructors and help them in their education. That's what gave birth to a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about today. The first thing I'm going to talk about is something that really annoys me, that really upsets me, that I'm not very fond of, which is digital prizes. So digital prizes come in many forms. So you have badges and you have gifts. Badges are given for basically doing the bare minimum. You get badges for teamwork. You get badges, and this is where I think you'll see that right here. You'll get badges, and this is on my LMS, which is, the learning management system that several colleges, even high schools, use. You get a badge for being a good participant or participating in class, for being a good student, as if that's a measurable, quantifiable thing, which it is not. What I feel about those badges that show up on my LMS as soon as you log into my LMS is that they're really rewarding things that I expect a student to do every single day. I don't expect you to participate in class. I don't reward you for participating in class because I expect you to participate in class. I don't expect, you shouldn't expect a reward for being a good team player or for working in a group. That is something that you are asked to do. So that's the reason why I'm not very fond of prizes or, participation trophies, as we call them. The other part of digital prizes is gifts, which is, if you'll see, hours spent, star pupil, course completed, and you get a little gift, you open it, you get a little stars fly out. This is on some learning platforms. Once again, I do feel like those prizes or gifts award bare minimum. They award things that I expect you to do. Not only that, they also reward things that aren't learning based. You could just have the application open and then you could log in 100 hours spent on the application. You could run through everything really quickly and it would say course completed. It doesn't matter if you got high grades on something, it'll just say course completed. So these digital prizes very frequently reward you for just showing up. And a lot of these digital prizes just reward you because you have spent time on that application or on that website. They're rewarding you for making them money. And that's not what I want to reward. I want to reward learning. I want to reward education rather than just being a passive user of someone else's website or material. So I don't like digital prizes. Physical games. Now I separated my games into 3 different types: physical, virtual, and physio-virtual. Physical games are games that require mostly bodily movement, bodily ways of actually moving through the world. And an example of that is when I was trying to teach prepositions of space and movement, I believe. For some reason, I can't see something. Yes. I had a scavenger hunt, and this happened at the same time or around the same week that I was teaching the process paragraph. So words like first, second, third, next, then, afterwards, all of that. So I created, this was during my independent study day, which was a Thursday. I created an assignment that I thought, or I hoped, really bolstered what I was trying to teach, which was prepositions of space and movement. So first, head to this place on the 2nd floor, go to the ground floor. The 3rd step is to use the stairs to go up a floor. The next is to leave, look to your right. I made my students do this. This was a very real game. I gave them a printout of these instructions and I made them during their off day, during their independent study day, actually physically practice both the process paragraph. So the first step is next, then, all of that. And I made them practice the prepositions. I made them try to understand the prepositions of space and movement. And then you have a bit of an example of some of the students. This was them trying to find some places that I had asked them to go. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but yeah, they kind of figured it out and they started moving and they won the prize actually at the end. So the second thing I've done, and this was not during class time. I was walking downstairs and I saw my students and I asked them what they were doing, and they were actually playing a card game. They were playing a popular Kuwaiti card game called KOUT. And this was, again, around the same time that I taught the process paragraph, which means you had to give me a process and you had to give me the kind of descriptors, time descriptors for each process. And what I taught them was, okay, so they were talking in Arabic and they're like, oh, miss, this is what you do. And I've never played this game. And I was like, no, explain it to me in English and use process paragraph terms. And so it became this kind of group assignment where I had 5 students sitting talking amongst themselves, trying to figure out the words that they needed to translate from Kuwaiti Arabic to English, and then being like, okay, so the first thing you have to do is you have to like, miss, you have to, this is what you have to do. I'm like, so you have to shuffle. And they're like, yeah, you have to shuffle. Likrut. And someone will be like, cards. And I'll be like, yes, cards. You have to shuffle the cards. It became this great exercise of both group work, translation, of games, of teaching your instructor something that you're very passionate about. And that's how I used the process paragraph, something that they had learned in class, into a card game that they played in their off hours. Additionally, I also had a student, and this was at the beginning of my class, you know, when I'm still trying to like get to know my students and all of that. I discovered that one of my students is actually a pro bowler. He plays bowling for the Kuwait national team. He has traveled abroad. He's gone to Malaysia. He's gone to these wonderful countries, and he's played bowling there. He's bowled there. And so when I got to the lesson about modal verbs, and modal verbs, to anyone who doesn't know, are verbs that are like, you must do this, you have to, you can, you cannot. So the day before, I told that student I would be using him as a live example for what can and cannot or should not be done when you're playing bowling. I went to like a toy store, like in the Jam'iyya, like in the cooperative society in our neighborhood. And I got these tiny little, as you can see, these tiny little bowling pins and a little bowling ball. I mean, I guess you can't see that they're small, but they are pretty small. And I set them up in the front of the class, and I said, okay, the student's name was Ali. And I was like, okay, Ali, so you have to now show the students what you can and cannot do. And we learned about bowling stances as well as practiced using modal verbs by physically seeing what the student was doing. So I'd be like, can you throw the ball like that? Like point it behind me. And I'd be like, no, you cannot, Miss Farah. You have to throw it. And I'd be like, oh, you have to. Like, yes, you have to. So there was this real grammatical lesson that was unfolding right before the students because they were just seeing this live example. And of course, you make it quite silly. And I did all these very wrong things because I wanted the students, and I wanted the student who was the bowler himself to also correct me and to show the correct use of those verbs. Additionally, we're very big on simulations in the foundation department, and I piloted this kind of assignment, which I think happened in the years after I left the foundation department as well, but it was a simulation of an email writing exercise. So it was a game, and you had to write an email, you had to talk to an instructor, you had to set up a fake meeting with the instructor, and you had to make sure that you followed all the rules that I had set about email writing. What I did is I looked through the students' names and I saw what their future majors would be. And so if students were going to be business majors, I set them up with business instructors, I connected them with business instructors. And if students were going to be IT majors, I connected them with IT instructors. And I told them, and of course, there were a lot of other students that I kind of used EGS, you know, English and General Studies instructors, places, things like that. And I made sure that they followed the rules that I had already set up for the email, which means you needed to have a greeting, you need to have a polite thing to say, like, you know, it's so lovely to hear from you again, or I hope you had a good weekend. You had to have a purpose to the email, you had to have a question, you had to set up a meeting, you had to do all of those things, and then you had to kind of have a closing. And there's an example of that. If you'll see, you know, dear Miss Carla, who is my head of department, I hope you're doing well. Hope you are doing well. There's some mistakes there. I have problems with reading. I'd like to have a meeting, best wishes. And I've removed the student's name just for his privacy's sake. But this is what I graded the students on. It had to be sent before Thursday, which was that independent study day. So it had to be sent before that day. It needed to be sent during working hours. So that's also something that I wanted the students to pay attention to. You cannot send an email at 10 p.m. You know, I was just like, that's inappropriate. The email is sent to the correct instructors because I had assigned instructors to each student. Ms. Farah has CC'd on the email. That was how they got graded. That's highlighted because that's the only way I'd give you a grade, because I needed to physically see that email in my email inbox. And then there's all of these other things that I also had for the students. But that was a real life simulation of you needing to kind of ask a question, of you needing help, that I made the students do. There's also something that I hadn't considered a game, but which the students, when I kind of asked them to remind me what games I've played with them, they said it was a game. One of the lessons that were in the textbook were about travel and fun. And because when I taught this class, it was during, kind of peak Corona. It was during the time when not a lot of people were allowed to travel, not a lot of people were allowed to move. I asked them, السياحة الداخلية, like there was a lot of talk in Kuwait at the time about like internal tourism in Kuwait. And so I said, where would you recommend someone would go to or visit if they were to visit Kuwait? And we spent perhaps 20 minutes, perhaps even more, just listing every fun place they could think of. And when I talked to some of those students in those classes later, they considered that a game. And it was really fun. It was such a great exercise, because I remember one of the students said, I would recommend someone, it was a male student, he would say, I would recommend someone go to KOUT. KOUT is a fabric kind of mall. And so I wrote KOUT. And then someone else was like, Miss, KOUT should probably be written blocks, because at is like the plural in Arabic. And so we led to this argument where we were like, so if the proper name, what it's called is KOUT, but I want to write it in English, do I say blocks or KOUT? And I think I yielded and I wrote just blocks, because I did appreciate the argument. But it was this really good exercise in language, in Arabic language, and the plural in English and the plural in Arabic. And I just really appreciated that kind of argument. I do love arguing about language. It's what makes it so much more real, because if you argue about it, you're passionate about it. So I didn't consider this a game, but students did, so I'm adding it there. Finally, this is something that I've done as a trainer. We went to a certain educational institute in Kuwait, and we kind of were there to, well, I'm a training analyst. So we analyzed the situation, we discussed it with the people who were affected, and they said that one of the problems they had is that they were really stressed out at work. And at the time in KTech, Miss Molly Divakaran was doing workplace desktop yoga. And so we just did that with those participants. I had asked her beforehand how I could do that. And so during that training, following what the trainees had asked for, I just said, okay, we're gonna do this 5 to 10 minute workplace yoga while you're still sitting in your chairs. No one was moving. It was basically like in your chairs, and you did exercises physically. And that was a de-stressing exercise / activity that we did right before I launched into the training. And it's something that I know they appreciated, because it meant that I had listened to them and kind of given them what they wanted. So games, as you can say, physical games don't really have to be one thing. You can 100% make them fit to what you're learning. And that's what I really try to do, is just make sure that everything I'm teaching always fits with the learning outcomes of that week. Now, virtual games. Virtual games are maybe my least favorite, but I will introduce them because they're part of gamification, so I will be discussing them. There is this option called Peer Deck. That's something that was really introduced when, online education was really kind of getting popular, and people were looking for ways to incorporate the vibes of a real classroom into the actual team's classroom. And there was Peer Deck, and it was a way to add questions into your slides. And for me personally, I just preferred when students would interrupt me. I thought that this very organized way of making students ask questions and answer questions made it less like a real classroom, because real classrooms do have interruptions. So I really appreciated it as an like I understand the idea behind it, but I personally just enjoyed the chaos of just like and Mike just opening and being like, I don't think that's right, or Miss, I have a question. Like, I just really appreciated that a bit more. Again, everything I'm saying is personal preference. There's also self-paced practice, and I like these self-paced practices, which maybe you have a textbook that has an application associated with it. I like those for students to do on their own. I don't like incorporating that kind of self-paced practice into my classroom because I think in my classroom, maybe this is very narcissistic of me, I like to rule that classroom. I don't want students to be on their phones. I want there to be kind of a communal feeling. And so I recommend that students do any kind of self-paced practice on their own at home during breaks, anything like that, but not in class. And I'm saying that because I do know people who introduce that kind of practice in class. And once again, personal preference, just not my own. Also, there's that instructor-led review. It's very funny. Again, when I was asking my students what games did they remember playing in class, they didn't mention these games. And I thought that they were fun, but I'm adding them there because the students didn't consider them games because they came with the textbook. And I think that's part of the reason that they weren't considered games, is because they were incorporated in the textbook. You know, it's the same kind of learning platform that you use for the textbook. You could click a little tab, you go to games, and you'd get these games. And I think that's part of the reason that the students didn't consider them games, is they're like, well, they're made by the publisher. They're clearly in the same platform. They're not a game. They're just more practice. Once again, I used them in class and I thought they were fun, but the fact that the students didn't mention them or consider them games when I asked them about the games we used is the reason I'm adding them. I think students do appreciate taking a step back away from the textbook, away from looking at the screen or the board or whatever it is, and doing something different. Opening up another book, opening it up to another platform, whatever it is. Yeah, so I just thought it was curious that the students didn't mention these when I asked them, like, oh, what games do you remember us playing? The physio virtual games, and these are one of my favorite kind of games. And they involve, a level of physicality of being present in a space, as well as the virtual aspect. In a training that I did for a certain company, I had to, teach the trainees how to write an email, how to write a professional email. And then we used examples that I had, and we asked them to say if they were correct, if they were incorrect, what they would change, things like that. And they had such a great time. It's one of the things, like, they didn't have to be this close. They didn't have to be this close to the screen. They literally all moved and got closer to the screen because of how excited and how just like enthused everyone was about this assignment. I asked them to write emails on their desktops and to send them to me. All of that, no one was this excited. And then as soon as there was this KOUT game, which meant you had to like correct, click on the correct option, people just got very excited. And I think there is this level of fun when you remove people from their traditional space. This particular group had been training with us for 4 days, and this was the last day. So I believe us asking them to kind of look away from the screen and do something else really added like a kind of a level of joy and fun to that training. Additionally, there were these riddles and brain teasers that I had, and this was part of Foundation Week, I believe a year ago. Yeah, fall 2021. So it was a year ago. And one of the comments was one of the, it's in Arabic, which, bad. Should have been in English, not that Arabic is a bad language, but a student said, one of the best activities were the riddles and brain teasers that I had done. And that's me on stage. Not only did I do these riddles and brain teasers in Foundation Week, but also a year later, when we ran into some issues, or when I personally noticed some issues with my students in class, not knowing how to pronounce numbers in English, how to like, numeracy was like, that level of numeracy was missing a little bit. I also did a KOUT quiz that was math in English. So I'd say, what is 7 multiplied by 3? But I just write out everything. It wasn't the number 7, it was like 7 written out. And I tried to make sure that the students understood what was written, what was being said. And a lot of students didn't. A lot of students were really used to like the English numbers being numbers and not actually written out. And that's something that was rectified. And I actually invited the math instructor to my classroom when I did this exercise, just because I wanted her to also see the level that we were dealing with. And it also opened her eye as well. Sorry, someone could be muted. I also noticed that she was surprised, because I don't think she had expected that, but you know, it was good for all of us to know what was happening in our classrooms and with our students. There was also my second scavenger hunt, and this was also the semester where my eyes opened up a little bit to the link between math and English and computing, and I really tried to like make them all work together. And so the reason this scavenger hunt is in the physio virtual games section is because I wrote all of those questions. I put them on the LMS that we use, which is MODAL. I put a password there. I emailed them the password. They needed to write a really nice, well-written email to get the password. It just became this entire like day-long activity. It wasn't day-long activity, it was like a 2-hour activity, but it involved a lot. They had to write a good email. So they had to like remember how to write and properly structure an email. When they wrote me that email, I sent them a password that they could use to enter this quiz. And then they had to log in and write all the answers on their phones and send them to me. So that was, you know, level of computing. And some of the things that I had asked them to do is go to Superfoods, which is one of the restaurants we have in our store, in our college in K-Tech. How much is a PBJ bowl, which meant they had to read and they had to find that bowl on the menu. And then they had to tell me exactly how much it costs, and they had to write down the currency, which means that they need to understand what the word currency means, العملة. So KD or KWD is what I would have accepted. Head to the cafeteria, how many tables are there? Multiply that number by 2. There were a lot of instructions. You know, go to the student parking lot. What is the color and model of the car in the 4th column on the 2nd row? This was me trying to emphasize a computing concept for Excel. So columns and rows, just trying to make sure that that was emphasized, that they understood what a column was, what a row was. And I had like sat there and I had noticed what car was there. And I really hoped that that car hadn't moved, but I knew what the car should be, what it should say. And then, you know, there was find an English instructor and tell them 3 action verbs related to what you've done. So I had a student who was like, run, search, look, or like watch, or something like that. You know, there was an understanding of what an action verb should be. There is also the fact that you have to interact with someone that maybe you'd never interacted with before and ask them politely. So there was also like real life skills that I was asking them to do. You know, you had to approach someone, you had to be polite. You had to like say, oh, by the way, Ms. Farah sent me to do this. Do you mind if I just tell you what I'm doing right now? And they had to write the name of the instructor they spoke to. Again, in a training that I had conducted, the training that I had conducted with the K-Tech Institute for Private Training related to cultural norms, related to cultural experiences, things like that. And so I did a live multiple choice. And if you see in the back, there's some countries mentioned because it was something that related to like cultural norms in certain countries. And I didn't want to use KOUT because I just wanted this to be a conversation. And so I'd ask the question, and as you saw, the trainees were sitting in their tables. And so I'd ask the question, and then we just discuss how that differed from what we're used to, how we might react if that was the cultural norm in the country we were in, things like that. And it really lended itself to conversation. It was a very enlightening experience and conversation. And it's something that I will 100% incorporate in my future trainings as well, because I think, especially with adults, that kind of conversation after each question is really needed. Everyone jokes, everyone talks, it loosens up the atmosphere to not go from question to question to question and have a time limit on things. In summary, to summarize what I've said, your students or your trainees, just because I don't currently have students right now, sometimes I just say trainees, they tell you so much verbally or through their actions. Make sure you're listening. For example, in my training, had I not known that the trainees wanted a de-stressing exercise, I might not have incorporated it. Students/trainees tell you so much. Make sure you're listening. Students tell you they're bored when they start fidgeting. When you see a majority of the students start fidgeting, they're playing with their pens, that's your students telling you, I need a break right now. And that's maybe the time when you should be kind of like, okay, this is when, tomorrow, next class, I need to find a game. I need to, break the routine that I've set up and find something a little bit more fun to do. There's no such thing as being too old for games. There really is no such thing as being too old for games. I've gone to trainings where, people as old as 60 have been just as enthused to have a game to play. I think people just really kind of want an excuse to play a game, and educational spaces are a great time for that, because if someone, even an 18-year-old up to like a 100-year-old, if they're in an educational space, they're there to learn and they're there to gain experience in some way. And they're also old enough, they've already like broadened their mind in that way. So it won't hurt to broaden their mind a little bit more and incorporate games in that education. Ensure that learning outcomes are being fulfilled through the game. This is really important to me. And that's why every time I've mentioned a game that I've used, I've told you exactly what lesson was associated with it. Always make sure that learning outcomes are being fulfilled. It doesn't help at all if you just play a game. Make sure that you have a purpose in mind, because that also helps you rearrange how you want to play the game. That also helps you set up the rules for that game. Always know, okay, so I want them to practice this grammar rule, and that's what the game is going to be focused towards. I am someone who really needs organization and focus. And so when I have that in mind, when I'm setting up a game, that's how I know it's a successful game, because it means that the learning outcomes I had in mind are being fulfilled. Games and play are not a one-size-fits-all. What worked for one group might not work for others. Part of the challenge and joy as an instructor is making sure you found what works. I have students who really enjoyed scavenger hunts. The version 1 scavenger hunt, they really had a good time. My second group of students didn't enjoy it as much. That's something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean it's a completely, failed concept. It just means maybe it's something that I needed to rethink for my second group. Maybe my first group of students were just so like gung-ho and excited to be back in a classroom that they were down to play, they were down to do anything. So just make sure that if you do a game and it doesn't work, it doesn't mean it's a completely failed concept. It just means that maybe it's something that another group would enjoy. It may be something that needs a little bit more rethinking. And that's education for you. That's something that you're learning, which is, again, delightful. Make sure you're also having fun. We're so very kind and gentle and understanding for our students. We kind of extend that courtesy to our students. And I think it's just as necessary to extend that kindness and courtesy to ourselves and explore them and encourage them to explore things their way. Because, to speak humbly, I think that's how you get amazing things to happen. So yeah, if you're playing a game in your classroom, make sure you're also having a good time, because it's a game. It's fun at the end of the day. So you need to make sure you're also having fun. And thank you very much. This is, if anyone wants to email me, this is my KTech email. I'm currently working as a training and development analyst, and there's my LinkedIn. I've had a delightful time with you all.
Thank you so much, Ms. Farah, for such an amazing session. Honestly speaking, I've gotten a lot of private comments for some reason. People are messaging me directly for some reason, but So we have Jumana. Jumana kept on messaging us saying how amazing it was and how all the information was very useful. Miss Aisha Al-Swaydan, we have Miss Dana, we have Miss Hanadi as well, we have Mr. Mahmoud. So I think the session went amazingly. So thank you so much. And not only that, thank you for also allowing us to kind of realize how when we do teach English, it's not just English, we're incorporating computing skills, we're incorporating life skills as well as math skills. So thank you so much for that amazing, amazing session.
You're so welcome.
I think we don't have any questions as much as comments, just really positive comments throughout the session. So
I couldn't see them, so I'm seeing some of them now. I couldn't see them earlier.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. So just to let everyone know who's here today, the link for the certificate has been posted in the chat box. So kindly just click on the certificate. We'll take you to the page where you can download the certificate and you can manually insert your name. So for those who were asking about previous certificates and previous sessions, kindly note that we do provide the certificate links throughout our sessions and they expire right after the session timings. So make sure that you always download your certificates within our sessions. And we will only be admitting members or participants throughout the very beginning of the session. So some people will not be able to join in later because we kind of restrict our timings. And yes, of course, we will be uploading the recording to the session on our YouTube channel. All right. And yes, we're very proud of Farah as well. And yes, Ms. Hadil, the certificate link is in the chat box if you could kindly download it from there. And just a reminder for everyone that's here today, we are still accepting proposals for our annual conference. And inshallah, it will the proposal deadline is the 5th of December. So you still have time if you would like to participate in our annual conference. Ms. Farah, will you have any additional sessions for TESOL Kuwait?
Oh,
that's one of our questions.
I would be very happy to have more sessions. I wouldn't mind at all. I just need to find a topic, I guess.
All right, wonderful. So yeah, so I think we will have Ms. Farah joining us in the future. Mr. Mohammed, I know that you have, but we're currently only looking for volunteers in Kuwait. So hopefully maybe if you relocate, we'll definitely have you join us. But for now, we're kind of keeping it restricted to volunteers within the region. All right, wonderful. So I just wanted to remind everyone we'll be uploading this wonderful session to our YouTube channel. Certificate link is in the chat box. If you have no questions, I would like to wish you a wonderful, wonderful week ahead. Thank you, Ms. Farah, for your time, your effort, and your amazing, amazing information that you've shared with us today.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.